Now joining the program, Jesse Temple. He joined us during the summer. Great to have him back. He's from The Athletic, and he's on the Deseret First Credit Union hotline. Jesse, welcome back.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
You got it. Here we are on game week and game day eve, BYU and Wisconsin. Let's break down the matchup. But first, for someone who has never been to Camp Randall Stadium, and Jason has, I have not, describe what the experience is like at Camp Randall Stadium.
Well, it's pretty special. They can seat 80,000, and they generally get pretty darn close to filling it up. And this is, as far as non-conference games go this season for Wisconsin, this is the big one among the three. The Badgers have had it pretty easy against Western Kentucky, and after a slow start, handled New Mexico. But this is going to be a big game for Wisconsin because it's the last one before Big Ten play starts, and I think the Badgers fans will show up. And, of course, if you are in Camp Randall, you have to partake, even if you're not a Badgers fan, in Jump Around, which has quickly become one of the better traditions in college football in the last 20 years. After the third quarter, they play the song Jump Around. Everybody acts accordingly, and the stadium shakes. It's really interesting and a fun atmosphere.
Yeah, having experienced that in the press box, it was both exhilarating and frightening all at the same time. So now you actually touched on something that I want to ask you about. You mentioned that this will be, out of the first three games, the biggest test for Wisconsin. So how good of a team do you think they are? I mean, they're the number 6 team, but they haven't been tested in the first 2 weeks.
Well, this is certainly a good team. I think it's been interesting if you pay attention to the polls. Wisconsin started at number 4 and then beat Western Kentucky by 31 points, dropped to number 5, beat New Mexico by 31 points again, dropped to number 6. So maybe nationally it seems like they're not punishing teams the way they should be, but I think that this team certainly has all the pieces to potentially make a run at the college football playoff. Now it's going to be dictated by whether the Badgers can win some very tough Big Ten games on the road. But they returned most of their pieces offensively. They've got a Heisman Trophy candidate at running back in Jonathan Taylor, 3 returning All-Americans on the offensive line, and a quarterback who I think doesn't necessarily get his due because all he does is win games. He's 22-3 as a starter here. So from the offensive side, I think they still haven't played their best, which you would expect early in the season. And defensively, even though there's a lot of new pieces, 7 new starters, so far they've held up quite well. So this, to me, is one of the better teams in college football.
Jonathan Taylor, as you mentioned, leading the nation in almost every relevant rushing category, including total yards, yards per game, touchdowns, and whatnot. Last season, 6th in the Heisman. I mean, is this guy the best running back in the country, in your opinion?
Well, he's in the conversation in the top 2 or 3. I've seen Jonathan the most, so I could make the case that he is, and you can just look at what he did last week. He set career highs for carries with 33 and rushing yards with 253, and he scored 3 touchdowns. And the one thing, if there's one knock on Jonathan at this point, it's been ball security issues. Now, he's still early in his career. He can turn this around, but he actually lost a fumble last week against New Mexico when Wisconsin was at the 4-yard line going in to score, and that's the second lost fumble he's had this season, and he's lost 8 fumbles now since the start of last season when he was a freshman. That's the most in the FBS during that time frame. So he spent a lot of time working on that, but you do kind of wonder as this moves forward and he gets as many carries as he does, will something happen potentially down the road where he loses a fumble that could cost Wisconsin a chance at a special season. But beyond that, all the numbers, I mean, he's as advertised, and I will say this may sound cliche, but he's every bit as good of a person off the field. His humility is a big reason why his teammates are so happy for his success. He's quick to credit everybody else, and I think that helps him not get too high during big moments and not get too low when he does make mistakes.
Jesse Temple covers Wisconsin for The Athletic. He's joining us on the Deseret First Credit Union hotline. Both Taylor and Hornibrook played very well in Provo last year, especially Alex, who only threw 1 incompletion. Where has he improved the most heading into this junior season?
One thing that I think he's really worked on, and this is, I talked to the quarterback's coach here, John Budmeyer, and right before fall camp, he said he spent a lot of time with Alex on what he called in-game situational awareness, and what he meant by that was maybe better understanding when to throw a pass into traffic and when to throw it away to live to fight another play. You mentioned that game against BYU. That game and Alex's performance in the Orange Bowl against Miami when he was the Orange Bowl MVP were the 2 biggest highlights last season. But there were also moments of maybe inconsistency. He threw 15 interceptions during the season, and only a handful of quarterbacks threw more in the FBS. So if he can drop that number, and I think he will do that this season, it's only going to make this offense more dangerous. But no one works harder than Alex on this team. I say that frequently, and I do mean it. He puts in the time and the effort to be the best that he can be, and I think we've seen that early this season already as well.
Wide receiver Danny Davis is back after being suspended for the first two games of the season. What kind of influence do you see him having on the offense?
I think he's going to have a major impact. I think he's going to play a significant number of snaps in this game. And now Wisconsin has a trio of wide receivers that you can make the case are as good as any in the Big Ten. Danny Davis, Kendrick Pryor, and A.J. Taylor, who through 2 games leads the Big Ten in receiving yards. A.J. Taylor's really stepped up his level of performance in his junior season. But Davis is the big play threat. And I think BYU fans may remember the catch that he had last season. It was a 50-yard reception, and there was a guy right in his face, and he was falling backward, and he still made the catch. And that was just one of his first games as a college player because he played as a true freshman. Not many receivers at Wisconsin can do that. So he provides a different dynamic for this receiver crew, and obviously that's only going to make the offense more dangerous.
BYU offensive coordinator Jeff Grimes said that the Wisconsin defense doesn't do a lot, but they're very good at what they do. What's the strength of this Badger defense?
Well, they're very sound fundamentally, first of all, and I think that they're able to kind of plug and play. You know, like you see that often with this Wisconsin team, even though there were a lot of questions coming into the season about the 7 new starters. I think that they do such a good job of developing these players. Even when they play, they've already been in the system for a year or two, and they fully understand how to compete at that level. So that's why we haven't seen much of a drop-off at this stage. You've got some young guys in the secondary who have recorded their first career interceptions already through 2 games. Scott Nelson, the redshirt freshman safety, is going to have a chance to be one of the leaders of this defense for 4 years. He had his first interception last week. Madison Cone, a cornerback, got his first last week. Faion Hicks got his first in the first game. So I think those guys have come along well. And then the front 7, I mean, the linebacker core, I think when you think of the defense, they've churned out some pretty darn good linebackers that have become NFL players, and they have that this year as well. T.J. Edwards, a first-team All-American last year at inside linebacker. Ryan Connolly was the leading tackler at inside linebacker last year. He's back. And Andrew Van Ginkel, who kind of was the star of the show late last season, has now moved into a starting role. So there's just really quality pieces all the way around.
All 3 seniors in that linebacking core. That's the case for BYU as well. So a fun matchup coming up tomorrow. What are Badger players and coaches saying about this game? Is BYU viewed as a big threat at all?
I think obviously they're taking this challenge very seriously, and I talked to Michael Dieter, who's the starting left guard. He's been a 3-year starter for the Badgers on the offensive line, and he says that BYU looks physical, and he was asked whether he agreed if this team looked like a Big Ten team, and he said he agrees with that. He says they have a Big Ten defense, they're a Big Ten team, they play physical and fast, and they're really sound fundamentally, and he said that's fun to play against. You love playing teams like that. They're not going to surprise you with a bunch of weird looks. They're going to play the way they play, and you've got to beat them. And, this is the type of game Wisconsin looks forward to. The first couple games, they've played some spread-type offenses that get out and throw the ball very quickly. Wisconsin wants to be in the trenches and play some physical football. And, again, I think this game does come at the perfect time because next week Wisconsin starts Big Ten play against Iowa.
Kalani Sitake said this is a measuring stick game, so we'll see how BYU, perceived by at least one person, measures up as a Big Ten type team. Jesse, we appreciate the time, not only in the summer, but here on Game Day Eve. Thanks, man.
Thank you for having me on. Take care.
Jesse Temple from The Athletic on the Deseret First Credit Union Hotline. Deseret First, your values, your timeline, your financial future.